is through investing in love, which means giving people hope. So instead of building a wall with Mexico, the American people should be funding development projects, education, scientific research, ecological research in countries like Venezuela, Guatemala, all the Latin American countries, working with us in the European Union to support their empowerment as people, their rights, as Simon Bolivar wanted, who's the hero of Venezuela. He'd read his Declaration of Independence. All Venezuelans want is, they want their rights too, which is perfectly legitimate. Simon Bolivar was a great liberal intellectual who spent time in Europe and went home to try and take these ideas of the Enlightenment back to source, back to Venezuela. And we should be helping them, not hindering them. And so people like Assange, he's actually a liberator. He's like a modern day intellectual Simon Bolivar trying to say, look, let's use the internet for peace, for spreading knowledge, not lies and disinformation. WikiLeaks has done tremendous work, and instead of being in prison, he should be, given a Nobel Peace Prize, in my opinion. I mean, as far as I can tell, and I have my colleagues in Sweden, they say all the charges against him in Sweden were simply fake, manufactured. Just false charges. And it's so tragic that he didn't have the courage to go and face them down and just speak his truth. I hope that he comes to eventually be able to do that and has a fair trial. And we in France should give him, rights of asylum and so on, or Switzerland. He should be allowed to go on doing his important work. What we have to do, above all, is see off militarism. And inspired by this vision of freedom that Thomas Jefferson gave us, and that Marx and Engels tried to give us by ending slavery. And don't forget, the Americans never ended slavery till the American Civil War broke out. It was still thought okay to keep people to do all the hard labour. You don't pay them even. They're kept in chains. They're shackled. I mean, that's just monstrous. And yet, that's what, people thought. And if you read Marxist thinking, that's what they were so opposed to. So we have to build a society that doesn't put slavery to its core, or any kind of slavery. Now, the Confederacy, was proud of its slaving traditions. And I'm very suspicious when I see people like Trump and Bannon hark back to these good old days of the Confederacy, when the whites ruled and the blacks were the slaves. Do these people want to go back to that? Are they really that crazy? Possibly. I don't know. Discuss. Well, I'm sorry, not on my watch. I'm a peace activist, and the first and most important thing you can do to join me and get involved in my work is to be active in your mind. Fichte, the great German philosopher and inspirer to some extent of Hegel, said, thinking is also an activity. It's not just marching up and down with flags. It's thinking this stuff through. Think through Brexit, deep, deep, deep down. Think through what kind of revolution we need now. Well, I would say it's a revolution both of society, but also of our spiritual awakening. So it's the combination of the spiritual revolution with our social and economic needs. The only candidate in the American presidential election talking like this is Marianne Williamson, who I greatly respect her work as a philosophical visionary for many years. She's giving amazing lectures. Go listen to her. She's on the internet. She's slightly scathing, bless her. I mean, I love Marianne Williamson, but she A, hates British people, and B, hates aristocrats. The only slight problem I have with Marianne's, pitch is, please tone down your hatred of the British. It wasn't our fault that we had a mad king on the throne at the time of your revolution. George III was just mad, sadly, and that's why you had to revolt. If we had a sane king or queen, we could have sorted it all out amicably. And as for aristocrats, well, I'm afraid I disagree, because I think we need, as Aristotle said, we need our intellectual geniuses, we need our Chomskys, we need people like Marianne Williamson, we need the great thinkers of the planet to come together. We need the best doctors, the best ecologists, the best scientists. Knowledge is, to some extent, automatically an aristocratic game. As a teacher, I know that I'll have 30 kids in a class. 10 of them will really get what I'm saying, and 10 of them will be so bored they'll be chucking stuff out the window. and 10 of them will just be sort of like listening but not hearing. It's always been that way. It's not a judgment. Obviously, take the same class to a sports event, and the 10 that really like what I'm saying, which is quite intellectually challenging, they won't be particularly necessarily into the sports. So we are all brilliant at something. I'm a democratic aristocrat. I think that we can all be excellent at something. But to be against excellence is, I think, flawed. So that's my only critique of Marianne. And as for her hatred of the British, well, forgive me, but obviously I'm not going to go down that route because we're also lovely people, just as you guys are. So I want to say something, therefore, about why peace. The reason I set up a peace institute at the University of London, the reason I worked for 10 years in London teaching and tirelessly campaigning to get Parliament and the House of Lords thinking about peace, is that I still think Britain, if only we could become a nation using our intellectual capital, using our experience of running half the world for like 300 years, I think there's a lot of peace knowledge locked up in the United Kingdom. If only we can capitalise on that and share it. That's why we need a National Institute of Peace at London, which is what I've essentially set up. It's in waiting. And to play our role in forming a European-wide peace policy, because it's in the interests of France, Germany, Spain, Portugal, Slovenia, Austria, all the great European nations, Poland, that there should never be another war between us all, but also with our neighbours. So we have to somehow mediate the conflicts around the world. Israel, Palestine, we should send teams of mediators to solve their conflict. It's tragic. We shouldn't take sides. We love them both. And we want them to make friends. And we should be helping them, drawing the maps. The Roman Empire was quite good at drawing maps, and a few have come down. I'm doing a lot of research at the moment on the Druid history of the Celts from like 1500 BC, 2000, 3000 BC. And the Romans made these amazing maps, some of which survived, of all the different towns and villages and roads of their empire. We need to help create roadmaps for peace in these conflict zones. Syria's another. Iran, the USA and Israel, this deadly triangle. Again, we need to find a peace formula that each country and each culture can affirm its own higher aspirations. The Iranian people, if they read the statement by Thomas Jefferson, they would say 100%, we're with you on this. We love freedom. We love the right to pursue life, liberty and happiness, but we choose a different path than you. We've chosen the Islamic path. We're Shiites. We've chosen the path of Ali, who was the wisest and greatest of all Muhammad's successors. He was married to his daughter, right? And he's left amazing writings and texts. And so we, the Iranian people, want to pursue our peace policy. We never asked for wars. We've never invaded anyone. It was Iraq that invaded us. We defended ourselves. And ever since we had our Islamic Republic formed, our own attempt at a revolution, taking your ideas and the best of the French ideas and marrying up with Islam, you've been trying to get us and sending spies and, subversion and all the rest of it. And now Israel, your ally, is threatening to send nuclear bombs and attack us, Whereas our regime of nuclear energy formation is totally transparent. You've been able to inspect it. Yet Israel has 400 nuclear weapons stored away in its facilities, which are not inspected by any single atomic energy or nuclear weapons establishment in the UN system. They haven't signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, for instance, and yet you let them get away with it. So there's total double standards. Everyone bashes Iran, and yet nobody critiques the fact that Israel has got all these nuclear weapons in its own little territory and could destroy every single capital city throughout the Middle East in half an hour, because it's got delivery systems. And none of that is regulated. So how come? That's a reasonable question for an Iranian to ask. And if I was mediating with the European Union Mediation Service on this, we'd all sit down in a hotel in Geneva or Brussels and have this out, because it's a long overdue conversation. The answer has to be to denuclearise the whole region, the Middle East and Europe. The answer has to be to get rid of nuclear weapons altogether from Russia and America. But we need for that a plan, a map. And that's what my Peace Institute is helping with. So I want to end here with a little story from Rumi, because he's a great poet, and he's inspired a lot of my work. I went to see where he was buried in Konya, and there's a story I'll just share from memory. So Rumi once grumbled. In the story, there's a man overhears, it's Moses, the prophet, overhears a chap praying to God. And this chap is praying to God in a very silly way. He's saying, God, I love you so much, I'm going to wash your shoes, I'm going to clean your tie, I'm going to look after you, I'll put you to bed at night, I'll feed your animals and flocks. And Moses is listening to this shepherd. He's a shepherd, right? And he, after a while, he interrupts. He appears from behind the bush and says to the shepherd, what a foolish man you are. Why are you saying that about God? God isn't like that at all. God is so transcendent and beyond any of those labels. God doesn't have feet. He doesn't keep goats. You can't put him to bed at night. What a simplistic person you are. For God's sake, I'm a prophet. I know better. Anyway, the shepherd got very distraught and he ran off crying, saying, oh no, I got it wrong, into the fields. And then Moses goes away feeling kind of justified, right? But then after a while, Moses suddenly hears the voice of God, or conscience, in his own mind, and he realizes that he was wrong. He judged that the shepherd, in his own simplicity and naivety, was closer to God than he in his pompous, I'm a great prophet kind of thing. And God actually ticks him off and says, that was totally uncalled for. What you've done is you've separated me from that simple, farmer who was worshipping me in the only way he knew best. And now you've interposed. You've filled him with doubt. He doesn't know what to believe anymore. He had a simple child's understanding of God, and now you've destroyed all that. So, and what God then says to Moses is that, look, in comparison to my truth, you're also at the level of the shepherd. If you did but know my mysteries, he says to him, the poem Rumi describes says many mysteries are then spoken by God, and the essence of those mysteries is, look, you were looking down on that shepherd because of his simplistic theology, but actually there are beings that are in my court which would look down on you and your simplistic theology as equally base, right? The real reality of God is so infinitely vaster than either the little shepherd or Moses can understand. And then the story ends happily, because what Moses does is he then goes off in search of the shepherd to apologize. And he says, look, I was wrong. Go back to what you're comfortable with. And I think the point of this teaching is that at whatever level of wisdom we are, at whatever level of understanding of the mysteries, and all of us are at different levels, even in our own lifetimes, we're at different levels. As St. Paul said, when I'm a child, I think like a child. We all see through the glass darkly, as Paul said later on. And even the most enlightened person on this planet, is in relative darkness compared to what our potential is, I think. I live and work for a world in which the full potential of each person to enlightenment can come forward, that we can manifest our own highest, best nature. This is the point that, to me, all these thinkers like Thomas Jefferson, like Marx and Engels in their own way, like Moses, like all the other prophets, Muhammad, Rumi, that's what we're all saying, is let's have a world where the genius inside all of us can be manifested. And today, I would finish on this note, is also in the Roman calendar. July the 4th was the one day of the year dedicated to Pax, the goddess peace. And there was an altar set up to her on July the 4th in 13 BC by Augustus, who was a great emperor. Kind of a reluctant emperor. Octavian didn't really want to be an emperor. He just did the role. Probably one of the better of the emperors. And he founded this altar of peace, the Ara Pacis, which every year on the 4th of July was celebrated. And peace, the goddess, Pax, had a cornucopia. She holds a horn of plenty. And to me this is symbolic of, through peace we reach prosperity. The military-industrial intelligence complex that is the vastest single expenditure racket on the planet, which capitalism has turned into, needs challenging, needs taking down. You know, I'm arguing that 95% of all those expenditures on militarism are unnecessary, can be converted to peace expenditures, development, the Green New Deal. And that's what the World Intellectual Forum is saying, and please join us. You know, let's work and make this possible. Whatever you are, an academic, a teacher, an intellectual, a philosopher, a scientist, a politician, a spiritual person, a mystic, a Sufi, you know, we all have our part to play. And let's all remember, my final point is there are two things. We can either remember our genius, each one of us, which means literally to put back together again. The UK can remember that it's a European nation and loves Europe. It can remember that its long tragic history, it doesn't want more civil wars. Europe as a whole can remember why we created the European Union. Or we can dismember. The alternative, the opposite to remembering, is dismembering, which means to forget and to cut apart and break apart. We can dismember the UK, which will happen over Brexit. Scotland will go its own way, Northern Ireland will rejoin the Republic, and probably Wales will go for independence, and God knows what's going to happen in England, probably a civil war, you know. We can go down the dismembering route, or we can go down the remembering route. And as a philosopher dedicated to the worship of the nine muses, like Plato, the mother of the nine muses is mnemosyne, memory. So I would say to all my dear friends and colleagues, let us remember together, let us remember, not dismember. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you so much for listening.